Welcome to the Learning Lab class, Podcast 101. My name is Melissa, and I'm one of the Adult and Teen Services librarians at the Arcadia Public Library. In this video, we're going to go over some terms that relate to podcasts and discuss the type of devices that you can listen to podcasts on. So let's get started. So first and foremost, it's helpful to understand some basic terms as it relates to podcasts. And probably the most important set of terms is streaming and downloading, or stream and download. So let's talk about them in the scenario of listening to a podcast episode. So streaming or stream means that the podcast episode is delivered to a device that you are playing it on in real time. In order to do this, you have to have an internet connection, either through Wi-Fi or cellular data, for the entire time that you're listening to the podcast episode. It's not saved on your device, so it's not taking up space, but it is using data the whole time. Now, the other option is downloading or download, and this means that the podcast file is transferred to your device and it's saved on your device. The transferring process itself requires an internet connection through either Wi-Fi or cellular data, but once it's on your device, you no longer need access to the internet to listen to that episode. It only uses that data the one time and then it takes up space. Whereas, like we mentioned with streaming, that uses data the whole time but doesn't take up any space. Now, some situations where you might use one versus the other. These are just examples. These are not the only options, but they're to help you get a sense of when you might choose one over the other. You might use streaming if you're at home and you're on your home Wi-Fi network and you want to listen to an episode on your desktop computer. On the other hand, you might download an episode to your phone so that you can listen to it in your car on your way to work. Another couple terms that are handy to know as it relates to podcast are podcast network and subscription. And both are exactly what they sound like. A podcast network is a network that creates or produces a group of podcasts that are usually connected by theme or genre or just by ownership. NPR, Exactly Right, Wondery, those are just a couple examples of podcasting networks. And then subscriptions, those are also just like it sounds. It's subscribing to a podcast so that you are notified when the latest episodes are released. So subscriptions are also how podcasts are typically set up to appear in your dashboard on podcast apps. And we're going to take a look at several podcast apps in later episodes or later videos, excuse me. So now that we know the difference between streaming and downloading, let's take a look at the different types of devices you can listen to a podcast on. First of all, any device you want to listen to a podcast on needs to have the ability to play sound with either speakers or by you plugging in headphones. So first, you can listen to a podcast on your desktop or laptop computer through the web browser. There's several different ways to do that. Lots of podcasts have their own web pages. Their podcast network will also usually have episodes up on their pages, or there are several websites that collect information about podcasts, such as Podcastland, Top Podcast, and others. And we're going to take a look at those in the next video. And those are places on the internet using an internet browser that you can listen to podcasts. And in that scenario, because you're on a desktop computer and you're in an internet browser, you're going to be streaming those episodes. Those aren't necessarily going to be downloaded to your device. Next, you can also listen to podcasts on an Apple device like iPhones or iPads. Usually the Apple Podcast app comes pre-installed on those devices, but if it's not on your device for some reason, you can also download it from the Apple Store. And there are additional apps that you can download to an Apple device to listen to podcasts if you want. And we're going to be taking a look at Apple Podcasts and other podcast apps that you can download to an Apple device in a separate video. And then finally, you can also access podcasts from an Android phone or tablet. So Google has their own podcast app called Google Podcasts. And much like the Apple devices, you can download Google Podcasts in the Play Store on an Android device. And we're going to be also looking at Google Podcasts and more in depth in a separate video. So you can decide what device and where listening to podcasts works best for you. The type of device you have will determine what app you might choose to listen to podcasts in, and where you want to listen is going to determine if you're going to want to stream the episodes and use your data or download and use the space. So it's just a trade-off. Both are perfectly acceptable. It's just going to depend on your situation. So in this video, we went over some definitions to understand podcasts better and talked about the type of devices that you can use to listen to podcasts. So I hope that you'll join us for our next video. We're going to be tackling the question of how to even find podcasts and figuring out which ones you might want to listen to. So feel free to leave us a comment below or reach out to staff if you have any additional questions or we can be of any further assistance.